covered with respect to the difference between what is install and what is import. So in layman terminology, one can consider install, pip install as installing the word within your system. But import is opening the word and then opening the document via it. Hence, in certain cases, even if there are inbuilt libraries, one has to import it within the corresponding notebook or cell or Python code in order for us to understand, for the execution to understand that we need to leverage the function from this corresponding module. We covered different types of notebooks that are available. One is Spark based engine, one is Python, and another is T-SQL Analytics. In T-SQL Analytics, we can mount any of the SQL Analytics endpoint and the Fabric warehouse. In Spark, you can mount lake houses. And you can mount n number of lake houses, but you can define only one as the default lake house on which the corresponding execution would happen. And then there is Python notebook that we take a look in this session. Now, so in Spark engine, you have couple of options with respect to PySpark, Spark, Spark SQL, and Spark meaning Scala, Spark SQL, and R. And one can leverage the concept of magic commands to change the corresponding cell configurations. And there is no specific restrictions of having one code or one language itself across all cells. Every cell can have a different aspect. Now, one can install a library at runtime, but every time the package is the module or the package or the library is installed, a couple of minutes or seconds are involved. One can avoid that by the concept of environment. That's where we created an environment. Within environment, you can publish your own custom libraries or libraries from PyPy or the Python or packages from the Python library itself that you intend to use. So it's like having your own environment, a pre-ready environment that you need for the execution to be present within your notebook. And then you can change the environment from the workspace default to the corresponding environment, wherein you can change the Spark settings. Along with that, you can have your own modules, libraries, or packages as per your own needs, rather than installing it in every runtime. So that is the benefit of environment. Any queries up till now? Now, when we had created the environment, let me sort it by type. One can see, correct, environment is uncommitted, meaning one can commit the environment to the source control. So let me go ahead and commit this set of changes. And validate. So by the time this synchronization to the Git is happening, let's move on to the next aspect. So we saw, so that was with respect to the environment aspect. Now, there are different ways how you can move the cells across. That's what we had taken a look. You can clear all the outputs that are visible across these cells. Then came in the concept of AI tools. Now, AI tool I was unable to execute because of my fabric trial capacity. But now I have enabled my dedicated capacity. Hence now I can execute this command, wherein yesterday within the environment, we saw that there were some inbuilt libraries like synapse.ml. So what I'm doing is, from that corresponding module, I'm importing the specific function that I need. Rather than importing all functions, I'm importing the specific functions that I need from the corresponding modules. And I'm using this AI version model for all the aspects that I need to do. So now first aspect is I need to execute this. Now when I execute this, whenever we execute any cell, by default a standard Spark session gets created. For every notebook execution, a specific standard, its own standard session gets executed. And that's what we'll take a look in a couple of minutes. So now I imported the corresponding function. Now what this AI.translate with, if you see, we have used AI functions. Now what this AI.translate does is basically it translates the corresponding data frame. Basically here I have provided a data frame of the column name of type text. Now within that, this is my input for my AI translate aspect. I want the output column name to be translations, and I want to convert this into Spanish and preserve it within translations and then display the translations. So now when I execute this, since I have already imported the corresponding functions that I need, now AI.translate is translating these aspects into Spanish. And there was no error in any of the translation aspect. Hello in Spanish meaning hola. So based on the normal understanding, you can understand that it has converted this into the corresponding Spanish language. Now, it's not specific that you can translate from English into anything. You can translate from any language to any language that you need. And there's some fixed set of frames within that. So now I have provided different language, and it does not mean that all the values need to be in the same language within the input for the output to translate into Spanish. Correct. So here I have provided a Japanese character, a Sanskrit or Hindi character, and a Chinese character. And I'm asking AI.translate to translate it into English. And everything here means hello. So there are certain set of inbuilt AI functions that one can leverage, like calculate similarity, compare the meaning of text, fix grammar, summarize the text, translate, extract entities, etc. So now let's take a look with respect to another aspect, that is with respect to, let me see an example that I can take a look. With respect to fixed grammar. Now, unfortunately, we all know that most of us sometimes do make mistakes with respect to grammatical errors. Now, in case if you have to provide any thesis or any of the aspect, one of the need is to have proper corrections to your grammatical aspects. So AI dot fix underscore grammar function converts or fixes the corresponding grammatical error. So let's take a look with respect to that. So there are an error here. Should map to there might be an error here or there is an error here. She and me go way back. We used to hang out every weeks. It should be every week. And she and I. There are an error here. Now it depends in which context it takes, correct? I can state that there is an error here, considering there is only an error. But there are errors here. Also makes sense. So in which context, as I said, AI and Copilot provide an output, but it is the responsibility of the user leveraging the Copilot or AI to validate whether the output is as per his need or not. So she and I, we used to hang out every week. So Microsoft Fabric Notebook does provide certain inbuilt AI functions for the users who do not have much technical understanding of AI or machine learning algorithms to make use of AI in an easy way via these AI functions. So you all can take a look with respect to all the AI functions as a part of your case study in case if you all are interested. Now, one aspect is whenever we executed any notebook explicitly, a separate standard session gets created. Now, how to identify that? So basically there is an aspect wherein I can get the corresponding Spark session ID that is getting executed via the Spark dot, basically its Spark session is Spark dot Spark context dot application ID. This provides a unique aspect for the corresponding Spark session, this session ID. So now let me execute this and get the corresponding session ID details. So I can see that this is the corresponding ID. Now let me parallelly execute this notebook. Now, since this notebook got executed for the first time, a separate standard session got created for the same, and hence it took a couple of minutes, and you can see the application ID is 961017. It's something different, 8507. So even if it's the same user, that is myself, who is using the same default environment with default mounting. In this case, there is no mounting, but imagine if I would have mounted this on the Lakehouse one and this also on the Lakehouse one. So it's the same environment that I want to execute, but for the same aspect of same user, same Spark setting configuration and libraries, meaning the same environment and the same mounting, I am creating separate standard sessions for the same. Whenever a separate session gets created, for the Spark engine to become active, couple of time is lost. In order to avoid that aspect, there is a concept of the high concurrency. And by default, we have enabled high concurrency at the workspace settings under the data engineering, data science Spark settings under high concurrency for notebooks. What does that mean? So rather than a standard session, what I can do is I can create a new high concurrency session for this. So for that, I have to explicitly create a high concurrency session. Now the limitation with the high concurrency session is, now you can see that as of now, I have created a high concurrency session and there's only one. One can maximum mount 5 different notebooks to a high concurrency session. So now let me execute this notebook. So I can see that now the ID is 62555. Now for this, I have an option to mount, either create a new standard session for this or mount it on the available high concurrency session. So now I mounted this on the available high concurrency session and now I'll execute this. So now under the drop down, I'll see that there are 2 notebooks mounted for the high concurrency session overall. Now the application ID 62555 is similar to the application ID of the other notebook because we are executing it in the same session that is created. Hence, it has the same ID. So this in turn helps in avoiding the creation of new Spark sessions every time for every execution, thereby ensuring a quicker output for the notebooks. But remember, the first execution of the notebook does have to activate that, correct? So the first execution might take some time, but the subsequent executions would automatically be much more quicker. So any queries on the concept of high concurrency session at the notebook level? What this property does?
Nandan, this executing it on a standard session or a high concurrency, this is manual, right? Like when you do it, when you call a notebook within a pipeline, then this concept will it work?
I'll come to that now. That's this
Okay,
aspect of the secondary setting here.
okay.
When you are executing here, it's manual, correct? But with respect to
Huh.
pipeline, that's where this concept comes here.
Okay.
I'll come to that. So now let's come to any queries at this aspect of high concurrency at the notebook level. If no, then let's move to the pipeline aspect. So within this pipeline, if you will see, let's say I'm calling 2 notebooks. That is the notebook 1 and the notebook 2 here. Correct. And now let me execute the corresponding pipeline. And you all can see that in the exit of both the notebooks, I'm leveraging the app underscore ID, meaning the session ID that I want for me to check the corresponding aspects of the notebook execution. And let me go to the corresponding setting for this workspace. So here you can see that under Date Spark settings, under high concurrency, for pipeline running multiple notebooks, the setting is off. Since I added multiple AI translate scenarios within the notebook, it is taking time. So by the time that is getting executed, let me go and take a look with respect to the delete trial capacity. Okay. Now if you see, the environment that we created also got synced within the corresponding source control. Now let's go and check what does that actually look like, correct? So for that, first I need to check where I have synchronized. It is in DataSharks education. Okay. So now if you check, both the notebook got executed. Okay? Let me take a look at the output. So here, high concurrency mode status is null. Exit value is 7349. And here the exit value is 89856 because the high concurrency mode was turned on in the settings of, and because of that, there is no, every notebook created its own session, and hence we had a separate session ID pertaining to every notebook execution within the pipeline. So indirectly, it is taking time to create it. Every notebook execution is taking time to create its own session. So for that, now let me go to the workspace, settings, and under data engineering, data science, Spark settings, under high concurrency, let me turn this feature on. Once that, now since we have enabled that property, now in case if I go and execute this pipeline, now let's take a look with respect to what those session IDs are. So by the time that is getting executed, let's take a look with respect to the corresponding aspect. So it is in DataSharks education. Within DataSharks education, it is in Microsoft Fabric project. Within Microsoft Fabric project, it is within Power BI Git repository. Within Power BI, it is under DevOps Git integration. Now I can see that environment, correct? DBT environment. Here I can see which all public libraries were installed. Correct. I can see that the DBT yesterday in the environment, we had installed the DBT public library and the corresponding version of the DBT that we had installed. So that is present under the environment.yml file. And the Spark Compute Engine setting, in case if I had to explicitly change it from runtime version 1.3 to 1.4 or to some other versions, or to change the number of nodes that are available. So this is how the Git integration of the corresponding environment is visible. Now with respect to data flow, you can check the corresponding JSON aspect that is visible, which all queries I did, sales customer, the connection to that. Notebooks. Under notebook, I have the corresponding aspect, that is I was printing ABC. Print ABC. DBT version. but the corresponding environment ID and the workspace ID is also mapped accordingly. So here you can see the markdown aspect, the parameter cell, the corresponding code, everything gets incorporated within the corresponding Git integration. You need not explicitly manage it. But in case if one has to explicitly manage the notebook, there is another way to have that. And we'll take a look in some time. Now, both of them got executed. Now let's check the ID 396413. And you can check high concurrency mode status earlier was null, but it has a session source. Correct? 6413. 6413. So it is based on this configuration setting that in pipeline, in case if we are executing multiple notebooks, the corresponding would take the same aspect, the same session. But based on what I know, I need to confirm back is this high concurrency concept is for the notebooks within the same workspace. And of course, it follows all other principles that the notebooks should be executed by the same user, should have the same Spark configurations, and should be mounted to the similar system, that is Lakehouse or anything. So any queries on the concept of concurrency and why concurrency concept is important for better performance optimizations? Yes or no?
No question.
Okay.
No.
So now let me go to one of the notebook. Now one can download a notebook in different formats in case if you want to explicitly preserve it. I can download it as an HTML file. Correct. I can download it as .py file or notebook and other aspects. Correct. So I would suggest you all to create a notebook and check, first execute the notebook and then download in different formats that are available and check the corresponding notebook. Now, when you download an HTML file, the problem is if you see, correct, this is how the HTML file would be present. For every cell, it would have the corresponding other aspects that is not needed for us. Similarly, I would suggest you all to first execute your queries like print and other aspects and then try downloading the corresponding notebook in different formats. And then you all can preserve your code explicitly in case if you do not have Git integration enabled. In case of Git integration enabled, we saw that it automatically maps it in the form of .py file. Now, let me create another notebook. So there are three types of notebooks: Spark based notebooks, T-SQL and Python. Now let me go to Python based notebook. Now if you see in Python based notebook, the language is fixed to Python itself, meaning this is a complete Python based notebook. So those who are familiar or those who want to do your coding fully based on Python itself, no other languages, they can map it to the Python based notebook. And Python also has different language versions. So you can select the specific version of the language that you want to code on. But unlike PySpark or the Spark Engine notebook, wherein you had the concept of environment, unfortunately in Python based notebook, as of today, there is no environment aspect. So imagine that if you want to install or leverage public libraries that are not inbuilt, then for every execution, you have to do a pip install itself. Because unlike Spark Engine notebooks wherein you could set up your own environment, Python notebook do not provide such flexibility. So then, and other aspects are same. With respect to Copilot and other aspects, those are all same. So then, what is the benefit of Python notebook over PySpark notebook? First, it is a lightweight notebook, meaning it gets executed very quickly, unlike Spark Engine, wherein Spark Engine does take some time to generate a cluster, meaning to set up, etc. So, for lightweight data transformations, etc., Python notebook is the way for you all to proceed in case if you want it. It's not an at must requirement, but those who are flexible with pure Python aspect and want to proceed with that, and it's a lightweight transformations, then Python notebook is your way. And even the pip installation that you do, since it's direct Python, it gets done quickly, unlike PySpark notebook, which takes couple of seconds or minutes depending upon the library aspect. So here also you can, as said, mount your lakehouse and then do the necessary set of transformation wherein I want to load data. Now, if you see in Spark Engine, you can execute PySpark or Python. Hence, you had the option of load data via Sparks or Pandas. Pandas is a typical Python library. But now, since this is specific Python notebook itself, I get only the option of Python. So, hence, there is only an option with respect to Pandas and not Spark way to load the data. So now in case if I execute this, it would get executed. It's a normal aspect. And other aspects with respect to parameterization, mapping this cell as parameter cell, merge cells, etc. Those concept remains the same. Those are the generic concepts with respect to notebook, be it anywhere. So this is Python specific notebook wherein you have something called as kernel sessions for it to proceed with. Now, in case of my earlier notebook, that is notebook 1 within the concurrency, since the session is still active, what I can do is I can state that now let me clear all the output. So now, in case if I want to execute everything below from here, correct? So there is an option wherein run cells, run this cell, run all cells, run cells that are below this. Okay, I had to select the specific. Okay, I cannot cancel. So basically what this option provides is you can either run all these cells, run cells below the one that has been selected. Correct, I had not explicitly selected that cell, or run cells above that cell. In that way, in case if you want to avoid importing every time, because once you import within a session, then that corresponding aspect remains throughout the session unless you explicitly stop the session. That's what we had seen. That in case if you do pip install, if you import, those libraries are available throughout that session when till the time it has been stopped. So there is no need for me to run that cell again. And I cannot comment, I can comment that cell and execute runs all cells, but there's a better way wherein you can skip that cell and run all the cells below that. So this is with respect to the concept of notebooks. Any queries?
No, Colin.
These notebooks are individual files only, right? Like can you use CI/CD or something to execute a notebook, or it is within the pipeline only and it has to go through that way only? Or a project file where you can call it within, or like just as we have a DAC pack, where then that you can use under CI/CD.
So
So
now
any concept like that?
I'm getting confused with respect to your query. Is your query on how you can execute a notebook or how you can deploy a notebook?
Yeah, deploy basically.
So they deploy, there are deployment pipelines or the REST APIs via which you can create the corresponding notebooks. So yes,
Okay.
there are deployment pipelines and CI/CD aspect. Git integration. If you remember Git integration,
Correct. Yeah.
correct. What I can do is
Uh,
I can copy that, I can clone it with a new name, I can synchronize it to automatically create a notebook with that corresponding aspect. Or there are pipelines available, or there are REST APIs available for me to create the corresponding notebooks as well.
Okay. Okay.
But in case if your question is, can notebooks be executed separately? Yes, notebooks can be executed. The second question, in case if you have that, under setting schedules, you can execute it, schedule it separately. But the restriction is you cannot update the parameters. You cannot change the parameters in case if it is scheduled to take the default parameters that has been declared at the top. In case if you want to override the parameters, you have to go the route of pipeline, or there are REST APIs to trigger the notebooks. You can leverage that as well.
Okay.
Clear?
And then there is no concept like a project file or something, right? All of these are individual only, right?
Because every aspect is individual itself here, correct? Within the workspace, every offering that you create is independent. Correct. When I say independent, let's be clear that within the pipeline, though I'm calling the notebook, the extension, the offering, the type and the object, the combination of type and the object name is unique within the workspace. Correct. So there is no correlation between these two. So every object based on its type is a separate entity within the repository that gets created. And that's what we had seen, correct? It is the name dot object type based on which your Git integration happens.
Correct.
Clear?
Okay. Yeah.
Any other queries with respect to the concept of notebook and environment, and why environment is a very critical aspect for managing all your pre-built setup for a quicker execution of the notebooks? Any queries? No. If no, then remember we have been using Copilot for data pipeline and data flow gen 2. And we would eventually take a look with respect to the data, the Copilot within Notebook, Fabric Warehouse as well. Correct. But then what is the cost that is associated with the Copilot? Correct. So for that, Microsoft has its own calculation of how. See, remember, Costing with respect to the fabric is based on two aspects. One is the fabric capacity that we have purchased, meaning the CPU utilize the cost, the engine utilization and the storage aspect. Correct. So when we say the cost that is associated with the Copilot, it means the cost that the capacity consumption unit of that fabric capacity is what we would be calculating, meaning how much capacity utilization of the fabric capacity is getting utilized. So for that, this is how Microsoft calculates the Copilot consumption in seconds. Is the input token count into 400 plus output token count into 1200 divided by 1000. Now, what does input token count and output token count mean? Let's take a look. So, it's with respect to this concept that we understand what the tokens are. Tokens are basically, okay, let me take an example here, correct? If you remember, we had given certain prompts within the Copilot to create the data pipeline, correct? Create a copy activity, copying data from Azure SQL database via connection X to Azure Blob Storage via connection Y. This was the input prompt that I had provided. For every prompt, what in general, this is not specific to Copilot, but in AI aspect, the engine, the chat, let's take an example, ChatGPT engine maps this within the corresponding set of tokens. So if you see that total 116 characters, but the engine maps it to 20 tokens depending upon the categorizations. Correct? Like from the Azure SQL database. It is these tokens that are getting calculated. So with this prompt, I am utilizing 21 input tokens. So it is 21 into 400 plus. Now, what is the output token count? If you remember, in the when you create that, a corresponding for a data pipeline, a corresponding data pipeline got created. Correct. In case of data pipeline, the underlying output is what basically it's the JSON code. Correct. So in case if I go and view the JSON definition, this is my output token that is getting generated. So now if I check what is the number of tokens for this corresponding, so there are 1231 characters, but it has converted it into 307 tokens. So it is the overall cost that was associated with my Copilot was 21, I guess it was 21, I don't remember, 21 into 400 plus 307 into 1200 divided by 1000. This is the amount of CU seconds that was consumed with respect to your Copilot. Now, for Dataflow Gen 2, it created that in the advanced editor we socket, it added a step and tweaked the last step. So it is this set of output prompts that get converted into tokens depending upon which model is being used for Copilot. If you see, depending upon the model, sometimes the token number do get updated. Hence, it is very critical you provide a proper prompt while leveraging Copilot to avoid the capacity consumption. Rather than using multiple prompts and irrelevant prompts, better to use a proper prompt. Hence, prompt engineering is one of the growing aspect within the IT industry, AI industry. So any queries with respect to the Fabric Copilot consumption aspect?
No, Nandan.
Okay. Now, let me pause my dedicated capacity. Now, within the new item, under get data, we saw copy job active, we saw data pipeline, data flow, Gen 1, Gen 2. We saw event stream while creating the event-based trigger. Real-time data streaming will take a look subsequently, meaning I'll just provide a brief understanding of what that is and not cover that in detail. We saw the concept of mirroring, wherein we mirrored the Azure SQL database. So similar to that, you can mirror other aspects as well from other sources as well, like from Azure SQL MI, on SQL servers, etc. Now, the data mart concept that is present here is a legacy object and would be deprecated, correct? Before the concept of Fabric came in, Microsoft had released a concept of data mart as a storage layer within the Power BI ecosystem. But then with Microsoft Fabric coming in, we having other aspects like Fabric SQL database, Fabric warehouse, lakehouse, etc. This concept became redundant. So now Microsoft is suggesting for those who have created the data mart to move over to the existing aspect itself, and this is getting deprecated. Event house is like a KQL database that we had discussed for streaming data. That we will take a look eventually. Lakehouse. Semantic model is your OLAP version. SQL database and warehouse. Now, those who are familiar, I won't cover this in detail, but those who are familiar with Apache Airflow or Airflow as one of the orchestration tool, Microsoft has added this functionality not only in the Fabric ecosystem, but also in the Azure Data Factory, wherein one can trigger the Airflow via Fabric or Azure Data Factory. Now, one thing that is here that I was to cover is Azure Data Factory. We have seen data pipelines, which is hosted on top of whose underlying engine is Azure Data Factory. So what is this feature of Azure Data Factory preview? Correct? That I'll discuss in a couple of minutes. And we saw environments and notebooks. We won't be covering ML machine learning aspects, so that would be skipped. Now, these are some of the inbuilt data system for third-party provided functionality for data aspects, in case if you want to check accounts. Now, what does this functionality mean, Azure Data Factory? The aspect with Microsoft Fabric Data Pipeline is in Azure Data Factory. Let me go to my Azure Data Factory. In Azure Data Factory, we said that within Microsoft Fabric, there is something called as Data Factory Experience that incorporates data pipelines and data flow Gen 2. Now, in Azure Data Factory, in case if you see, there is something called as pipelines. Now, within the pipelines, most of the activities that we are able to see, like move and transform, notebooks, Azure Data Explorer, Azure Function, batch services, Databricks. Now the data analytics is an old aspect, USQL. Okay, this was a very old aspect that was earlier used for doing data transformations, but that is no longer valid in today's aspect. So you can ignore this. Then there are other activities like append variable, etc. But if you see, there is something called as execute SSIS packages that was not present in the Fabric ecosystem, Fabric data pipeline aspect. And then there is something called as data flows. Now the data flows that are present in Data Factory is different than the data flow Gen 2. So in case if I want to create a new data flow, I can add a source. Then I have multiple different activities like derived column, window function, external call, flatten, alter row, add column, derived columns, etc. Split the columns. Now, did anywhere we see such aspects? No, correct? So those who have already, to organizations or clients have already invested hefty amount of time in designing their framework. So basically one can consider the data flows here as the transformation aspect. The other activities that you saw were equivalent to data pipeline. And we know that data pipeline only contains copy activity to do the movement of data, but no major transformations. So for major transformations, we have data flow Gen 2 in Fabric ecosystem. But in the Azure Data Factory ecosystem, there was something called as data flows, which is different than data flow Gen 2, and that you can see here. So there are organizations who have invested hefty amount of time in managing their data transformations, leveraging Azure Data Factory, and within that data flows. And unfortunately, there is no direct mapping of this data flow into the Fabric ecosystem, either in Fabric Data Pipeline or Fabric Data Flow Gen 2. So one has to manually recreate all their transformations again, either via notebooks or Data Flow Gen 2. But some of the clients won't prefer that, to again put their efforts in such migration initiative. So for that, what Microsoft does, and also there is an activity that we saw called SSI, execute SSIS packages. Now SSIS stands for SQL Server Integration Services, was the original Microsoft BI transfer tool for data movement and data transformation, available across on-premises and IaaS, and that is still available. It does not mean that it has gone. It is still there. So those who work on SQL servers and are on-premises or on infrastructure as a service, organizations and clients still continue to use SSIS because there are multiple aspects within SSIS that unfortunately are still not available in the equivalent of Azure Data, in the transformation tool of Microsoft PaaS service called Azure Data Factory. So some of the organizations still continue to use SSIS. But imagine that in case if I want to schedule the SSIS via integrate SSIS with Azure Data Factory, I do have that option to trigger the SSIS aspect, wherein Azure Data Factory provides the corresponding SSIS engine for its execution. But unfortunately, that is not available in the Fabric ecosystem. So for that purpose, what Microsoft has done is it has provided the option of something called as mount your Azure Data Factory within Fabric, so that it's within Fabric workspace, it is one stop shop for everything. So what you are basically doing is this provides me basically when you click on Mount Azure Data Factory, it provides me with the list of data factories that my corresponding account has access to. So my account has access to these many number of Azure Data Factories. So I'll mount this. So when you mount a data factory, what it basically does is it basically mounts, or now in case if I close this. So now if I click here, I can automatically, rather than going to my Azure portal, portal.azure.com, mounting the Azure Data Factory directly takes me to that corresponding authoring section there itself of the Azure portal. And I can still make changes here if I want, meaning I can create a new pipeline. I can add the activities that I need, correct? I can create a data flow, etc. So it would provide me a similar experience what it provides with respect to the Azure portal, but in the Fabric ecosystem itself. And then I can go and execute the pipelines that I need with respect to the corresponding ecosystem. And I can check the run history that got executed within this corresponding pipeline or ecosystem. So rather than I having to go across Azure portal and looking across all the logs, etc., I can mount the Azure Data Factory into my corresponding Fabric workspace and directly go from Fabric workspace to the Data Factory experience, to the Azure Data Factory, rather than going via Azure portal. It's just that. If I want to monitor into Azure Data Factory monitor aspect, I can click on the monitor in Azure Data Factory and it would go across that. So it's basically mounting your Azure Data Factory within the corresponding Fabric workspace. Now, does mounting the Azure Data Factory in the Fabric workspace consume the Fabric capacity or consume the Azure capacity itself? Any thoughts?
Azure,
Fabric
maybe.
capacity.
It's basically the Azure capacity itself that it consumes. Nowhere your Fabric capacity is consumed, nor any cost is associated with that. Because as I said, correct, it's the Azure engine on which Azure Data Factory is running. You're just mounting it as a visual, as a UI experience for you to leverage make changes in the Azure Data Factory via the Fabric portal itself. Nothing else. Clear?
Yes, Nand.
So this is with respect to mounting. So this is how you basically start integrating your PaaS and SaaS ecosystem together so that within Fabric Workspace acts as your one-stop shop for everything, right from the managing to development to monitoring aspects. Now, if you see, I see that the Azure Data Factory is uncommitted. Now, let me go and commit this. And let's take a look as to what does it signify. So if you see, it only provides me anywhere am I seeing the JSON code of the corresponding pipelines? No, correct. It's only the data factory resource ID that I mounted. And let's validate that. Subscriptions 77125A 77125A resource group Fabric Copilot Microsoft Data Factory. Within that factories, within that I have the Copilot Data Factory. This is my data factory name. So basically, Git integration or the source control integration of the data factory mount is basically which resource ID has been mounted, the resource ID of what has been mounted. Any queries? And not the underlying JSON. Any queries up till now? I'll take that as a no then. So